Hello, this is Heather Hoffman, and I'm here today to share a wintry, snowy scene card with you, using again the August 2019 Kit of the Month. I love that beautiful tree image. It's such a great focal point for a card, and then there's a great sentiment to go along with it. I'm going to go ahead and stamp and heat emboss it on some Ranger Distress watercolor cardstock. I'm using the back side that's smoother. It's a little easier to stamp and heat emboss and get a good impression, and it's still nice and sturdy and good watercolor paper. I really like this brand for that ability, that I can use either the more textured or the smoother side. I'm rubbing an embossing powder tool over that. That just kind of removes some static and helps make sure that my embossing powder won't stick anywhere I don't want it to. And then I'm going to ink that up really well and stamp it. And since I'm using my Misty, I'm actually going to stamp it at least 2 or 3 times. Usually I get a great impression on the first one, but because the Misty allows me to line it up perfectly, I like to do it several times, just because I really hate when you start heat embossing, since you can't see that clear ink very well. It's just nice to make absolutely certain that you have everything covered in a good impression. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle on. I'm using gold embossing powder, and then I'm going to heat set it. I kind of skipped through some of that, but I just made sure I had embossing powder over the whole image and heat set it. Now I'm going to watercolor with some mini distress inks. Any size will work, or you can use refills as well. I'm using 2 green colors and 2 blue colors. I'm starting off with Evergreen Bough, and I'm just going to really simply and roughly watercolor. I'm not doing anything too fancy. I'm not even worrying perfectly about staying in the lines. I'm just going over it real quick, adding water as I need. And then I did that on that side, and then I'm going to use pine needles to come in on the other side of the image, kind of for some depth and shadow effect. You'll be able to see as I come in there. And then I'll quickly add a little more of the darker and lighter colors and just kind of blend them together to get some more depth and shading in there. And as soon as I finish that, I'm going to kind of flip it around, and I'm going to go ahead and do the sky. I'm starting off there with some peacock feathers, which is kind of a bright turquoisey color. This is just going to kind of add a little highlight to the sky, and then I'm going to mostly fill it in because I kind of want this to be sort of a night sky scene. So I'm mostly filling in there with chipped sapphire, and as you can see, kind of that little bit of peacock feathers is just adding some light and shadow and different effects there. I love the way distress inks work for watercoloring, how well they blend together. And I wanted to add a little more layers onto the tree, so I went ahead and kind of cleaned that spot off on my clear block, and then I'm coming in and adding, just smudging it on. I'm using a clear block as my watercolor. You can use a clear plate, you can use a non-stick mat, kind of whatever works for you. Now this is the important part. While this is still wet, I've mixed together some white acrylic paint. I'm using a mini mister, but you can use a paintbrush or a little dish. And I've got this part a little bit thinner, and I'm putting it over my watercoloring, which is still damp. What this is going to allow this to do is the water is going to react with the distress ink, and that white paint is going to kind of spread, and it's going to give a softer, more haloed effect when it dries. While I set that aside to dry, I went ahead and took my sentiment, and I'm going to heat emboss that on a little bit of black cardstock. Didn't fit on my clear block crosswise, so I kind of just set it at an angle so I didn't have to pull out a bigger block. So kind of a good trick if your block isn't quite big enough and you can make it fit diagonally. I'm going to heat emboss that in white. One of my favorite things to do is emboss sentiments in white on black. I just love the way they pop and how it just is so bold and distinct. All right, now my background has dried. You can kind of see that white haloed effect. And then I have another mini mister. Again, you can just do this on a palette or something, but I've mixed a little stronger concentration of white acrylic paint with water. And now that this is fully dry, these are going to stay a little more defined and sharp. And I'm being really liberal with how much of these I put on. I want lots of snow on my background and lots of texture. It really just looks like going out in the woods and snow dumping on the trees. I decided to trim down my sentiment a little more to make it fit where I wanted, so I didn't cover too much of that background, and then I just adhered that with foam adhesive and popped the whole thing on a white card base. Can you see that shine from the gold and then all that snowy background? I just love that effect, and I love the feeling of being in a wintry wood scene. Thanks so much for coming by today. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a wonderful day.